Marriage in Victorian Britain was often spoken of as a woman's highest calling, a moral duty wrapped in romance, respectability, and social order. Popular literature of the era painted marriage as a safe harbor where a woman would be protected, cherished, and guided by her husband. Yet beneath this carefully polished image lay a far more complex and frequently harsh reality. For many Victorian women, marriage meant the loss of legal identity, economic independence, bodily autonomy, and often personal happiness. Understanding what marriage was really like for Victorian women requires setting aside the sentimental ideals and looking closely at the laws, customs, expectations, and daily experiences that shaped their lives. From the moment a woman married, the law treated her as fundamentally changed. Under the doctrine of coverture, a married woman's legal existence was absorbed into that of her husband. She could not own property in her own name, sign contracts, sue or be sued, or control her own wages. Everything she possessed, including money she inherited or earned, legally belonged to her husband. Even her body was not considered entirely her own. The idea was that husband and wife were one person in the eyes of the law, and that person was the husband. For women raised to believe marriage was a form of security, the shock of losing legal personhood could be profound, though many entered marriage without fully understanding the extent of what they were giving up. Economic dependence was one of the most defining features of Victorian marriage. Most middle and upper-class women were discouraged or outright forbidden from working for wages after marriage. Respectability depended on a husband's ability to provide. A woman who needed to earn money was often seen as evidence of a man's failure or a stain on family honor. This meant that a wife's comfort, survival, and future were tied almost entirely to her husband's character, health, and financial decisions. If he was generous, she might live comfortably. If he was careless, cruel, or abusive, she had few options for escape. For working-class women, marriage offered little relief from labor. Many continued to work in factories, domestic service, agriculture, or home-based trades even after marrying, especially when wages were low and families large. Yet their earnings were still legally controlled by their husbands. A woman might toil long hours only to see her wages taken and spent without her consent. This imbalance often created resentment and conflict within marriages. Though social norms strongly discouraged women from openly complaining or resisting, the expectation of obedience shaped nearly every aspect of a Victorian wife's daily life. Marriage manuals, sermons, and advice columns emphasized a woman's duty to submit to her husband's authority. He was considered the head of the household, responsible for moral guidance and discipline. A good wife was patient, gentle, self-sacrificing, and silent in disagreement. Assertiveness or independence could be interpreted as selfishness or moral failure. Many women learned to suppress their desires, opinions, and ambitions in order to maintain harmony and social approval. Domestic labor dominated a married woman's existence. Even in households with servants, the wife was expected to manage the home, supervise staff, plan meals, oversee children's education, maintain social connections, and uphold moral standards. For women without servants, domestic work was physically exhausting and relentless. Cooking, cleaning, washing clothes by hand, hauling water, tending fires, and caring for children filled nearly every waking hour. There were no weekends, sick days, or retirement from these duties. Pregnancy and childbirth were constant risks layered on top of this daily labor. Childbearing was perhaps the most defining and dangerous aspect of marriage for Victorian women. Reliable contraception was limited, poorly understood, or socially condemned. Many women experienced pregnancy almost continuously throughout their married lives. Each childbirth carried the risk of severe injury or death, as medical knowledge was still limited and hygiene practices were inconsistent. Maternal mortality rates were high, and complications such as infection, hemorrhage, or prolonged labor were common. Despite these dangers, women were expected to endure pregnancy and childbirth with stoicism, viewing suffering as a natural and even virtuous part of womanhood. Sexual relations within marriage were also governed by deeply unequal assumptions. A husband was believed to have the right to sexual access to his wife. and the concept of marital rape did not exist in law. A wife was expected to meet her husband's desires, regardless of her own feelings, health, or exhaustion. Many women experienced sexual relations as an obligation rather than an expression of intimacy. Yet they were also expected to embody purity and modesty, creating a painful contradiction between idealized femininity and marital reality. Emotional fulfillment in marriage varied widely, but romantic love was far from guaranteed. While some couples did develop deep affection and companionship, many marriages were practical arrangements based on social status, financial security, or family expectations. Women were often encouraged to accept proposals even if they felt little affection, as marriage was seen as essential to a woman's future. Remaining unmarried carried social stigma and economic vulnerability. For these women, marriage was less a choice than a necessity. Divorce was technically possible in Victorian England, but for most women it was inaccessible. Until the mid-19th century, divorce required a private act of parliament, a costly and public process available only to the wealthy. Even after reforms made divorce slightly more accessible, the standards were deeply unequal. A man could divorce his wife for adultery alone, while a woman had to prove adultery plus additional offenses such as cruelty or abandonment. The financial and social consequences of divorce for women were severe, often resulting in poverty, loss of children, and social ostracism. Leaving an abusive marriage was especially difficult. While extreme physical cruelty could sometimes justify legal separation, many forms of abuse were considered private matters beyond public concern. The law allowed husbands to use reasonable chastisement to discipline their wives, and social attitudes often blamed women for provoking mistreatment. Without independent income or legal rights, many women remained trapped in violent marriages, enduring harm for the sake of survival or their children. Motherhood was both a source of meaning and another form of confinement. Victorian ideals celebrated mothers as moral guardians of the home, responsible for shaping children's character and faith. Yet this idealization came with immense pressure. Mothers were blamed for their children's moral failures, illnesses, or misbehavior. At the same time, they had limited authority over their children's legal fate. Fathers held primary legal rights, including decisions about education, discipline, and custody. In cases of separation, children almost always remained with the father, regardless of the mother's role in raising them. Social class played a major role in shaping marital experiences. Upper-class women often lived lives of relative material comfort but intense restriction. Their behavior was closely scrutinized, their movements limited, and their reputations fragile. A single scandal could ruin not only a woman's standing but her entire family's social prospects. Middle-class women experienced a mix of respectability and constraint, often working tirelessly to maintain appearances on limited budgets. Working-class women faced physical hardship, economic insecurity, and higher risks of illness and early death, with fewer social protections. Despite these constraints, Victorian women were not passive victims. Many found ways to exert influence within their marriages and communities. Some managed household finances skillfully, subtly guiding decisions behind the scenes. Others formed strong emotional bonds with female friends, sisters, and neighbors, creating support networks that eased isolation. A growing number of women began to question the fairness of marriage laws and gender roles, laying the groundwork for legal reforms and early feminist movements. The latter part of the Victorian era saw important changes that slightly improved married women's lives. The Married Women's Property Acts allowed women to own and control property in their own names, a revolutionary shift that challenged the foundations of educational opportunities for women expanded, and debates about women's rights became more visible in public discourse. While these changes did not erase inequality, they offered new possibilities and hope for future generations. Emotionally, marriage could be a landscape of quiet endurance. Many women learned to find small joys within limited circumstances, taking pride in their homes, children, and moral influence. Religious faith often provided comfort and meaning, framing sacrifice as spiritually valuable. Yet beneath this surface of duty and devotion, letters and diaries reveal feelings of loneliness, frustration, fear, and unfulfilled longing. These private writings offer some of the most honest glimpses into what marriage truly felt like for Victorian women. The contrast between public ideals and private realities was stark. Society celebrated marriage as a source of stability and virtue, yet it was built on legal inequality and rigid gender roles. Women were praised for selflessness while being denied autonomy, expected to be strong while having little power. Marriage shaped nearly every aspect of a woman's identity, determining her social status, economic security, and daily experiences. To understand Victorian marriage is not simply to catalog suffering, but to recognize complexity. Some women experienced genuine affection, partnership, and respect within marriage. Others endured lives of hardship and silence. Most lived somewhere in between, navigating a system that offered limited choices. Their experiences remind us that marriage, as an institution, is shaped not just by personal relationships, but by laws, culture, and power. When viewed through a modern lens, Victorian marriage can seem deeply unjust, even shocking. Yet for the women who lived it, it was the framework within which they built their lives, dreams, and identities. Their resilience, compromises, and quiet acts of resistance helped push society toward change. By listening to their stories, we gain not only historical insight, but a deeper appreciation for the rights and freedoms that later generations would fight to secure.